In July 2011, the entire country of Mexico was gripped by a video showing cartel members Felix Gomez Garcia and his uncle Barnabas Gomez being dismembered with a chainsaw. Cartels are infamous for their extreme violence, which can include anything from beatings to death to being burned alive. Here, we explore some of the most brutal execution methods employed by these criminal organizations. The stew. On January 22, 2009, one of Mexico's most wanted criminals, Santiago Mesa Lopez, was captured by the Mexican army in the Baja Seasons neighborhood of Tijuana, at a house where he had been partying for several days. Commonly known as El Pozolero, which means the pozole maker. He was known as a special cleanup agent for the cartels and is believed to have dissolved over 300 bodies in acid at his ranch in Ensenada, about 112 kilometers south of the border. He gained notoriety for being one of the first to develop the elgo method. Elgo essentially means the stew and involves placing a person in a large oil drum, filling it with gasoline or acid, and setting it on fire to create a furnace used to burn the victims. This method is more commonly known as making stew or stewing. The originator of this technique remains unknown. However, some Mexican cartel cells have become infamous for using this preferred execution method. To prepare this lethal mixture, a huge barrel is filled with water and concentrated sulfuric acid, causing it to boil and expel dangerously hot liquid. When ready, the victims are immersed while still alive. This insane method of torture subjects victims to excruciating pain, ultimately leading to a slow death. Born to poor parents in mid-April 1964 in Sinaloa, Mexico, Santiago Mesa Lopez struggled with poverty from a very young age. At 13, he worked in construction until the 1990s, when he moved to Tijuana in search of a better life. However, after his sister was attacked by members of an organization, Lopez joined the Tijuana cartel, seeking revenge. Throughout his childhood, his friend El Teo, as time went by, Santiago eventually climbed the ranks, and a few years later, his efforts finally caught the attention of the boss, Efrain Perez. On a fateful day, Perez assigned him the grim task of disposing of bodies, offering him a weekly payment of $600, and that's when it all began. He liquefied his victims in a very effective and unique manner. He immersed the corpses in a bathtub filled with acid and sodium hydroxide, stirring the bodies. He kept this mixture on high heat for at least 8 hours, until the bodies finally disintegrated, as some body parts, like teeth or nails, and perhaps small bone fragments, did not dissolve. Santiago would eventually discard these remains in a vacant lot, burning them a second time with gasoline and burying them. Authorities say he claimed to have disposed of over 300 bodies in lime barrels, then pouring part of the liquefied remains into a pit in a compound on a hillside east of Danana. After his arrest, investigators found around 14,000 remains buried on his farm. The choice of name for this extremely violent execution method starts to make sense, as the torture technique revolves around cooking the victims. According to reports, when Santiago was being interrogated, he claimed to have tried to escape from his former boss, Perez, a former member of either the Arellano Felix cartel or the Tijuana cartel, but none of his attempts were successful. Lopez claimed he was recruited while working on a farm in 1996, where senior members of the Arellano Felix cartel invited him to conduct an experiment with water and acid in a barrel. Lopez said he had no choice and was forced to join, as they were threatened with violence to carry out these acts. Whether this is true or not, no one knows, but the fact remains that he did this for many years until he was finally captured. Animal feed. Since the 1980s, rare, dangerous, and exotic animals have been used to display extremely high levels of wealth. Over the years, cartel leaders have adopted another insane tradition. Just as Pablo Escobar kept hippopotamuses and other exotic creatures on his private estate, rare and dangerous animals remain a status symbol today for high-ranking members of the Mexican cartel, imitating the infamous Colombian drug lords of the 1980s and 1990s. It was a way to display power and send threats, as it seemed that the more dangerous a cartel was, the more dangerous animals would be found in their homes. Mexican authorities later claimed that these animals were not merely for display. Sometimes, cartels would throw their unfortunate victims into enclosed areas with hungry apex predators in an extremely cruel manner. The cartel would make their victims beg for their lives in fear, moments before being torn apart by these wild animals. One individual who used this method of torture was a cartel boss known as Heriberto Lascano, born into poverty on Christmas Day, December 1974, in Hidalgo, Mexico. He joined the army at the age of 17, serving in elite special forces dedicated to combating guerrillas and drug trafficking organizations. He served in the army for 7 years and deserted on March 27, 1998, when he was recruited by Ociel Cardenas Guillen and Arturo Guzman de Sena to join Los Zetas. Heriberto, also known as Z3 and El Lasca, was one of the most wanted Mexican drug lords of our time, according to authorities. He was a master of torturing his victims and was notorious for using a method known as La Paleta, which involved stripping a victim and brutally beating them with a piece of wood. Reports also state that Lascano once tied a man to a tree and severely beat him until his legs were broken, and then left him bound to the tree for about 3 days until he died. Lascano had a farm with many lions and tigers, and was especially known for killing his victims by feeding them to these wild animals. Although he didn't let the animals starve, he kept them hungry enough so that when a victim was presented, they would devour them. He claimed to be fascinated by the way his animals shredded the bodies of their victims and enjoyed watching the torture process, laughing at their pain. The general procedure was to force these people into a cage and allow an audience to watch the event unfold. Unfortunately, he never faced his own poison. Instead, he was killed in a shootout with Mexican military forces in 2012. Dismemberment. In 2015, Texas authorities arrested Marciano Chano Manon Vasquez, an alleged hitman for the Los Zetas cartel, involved in the 2013 kidnapping of a former drug associate. This associate was testifying against Vasquez, claiming that the cartel enforcer took him to an undisclosed location where Vasquez kept his family of 3, in his own words. When the hitman removed the blindfold, the drug associate saw a couple and their daughter standing near a burning barrel. According to him, Vasquez and other present members forced the parents to watch as Vasquez chopped the daughter to pieces with an axe. Not only Vasquez, but many in the cartel execute their victims through horrific acts, injecting them with morphine, adrenaline, or heroin to affect their central nervous system and keep them awake during the process. They would use sharp blades and sometimes even knives to completely sever the limbs of their victims during torture. Throughout the torture process, these individuals would avoid cutting near vital organs to keep the victims in agony for a much longer time. The combination of blood loss, infections, and extreme pain shock creates the perfect cocktail of torture, preparing people for the gates of paradise. These poor souls have no choice but to provide any information they are withholding, and more often than not, they would die from the pain. It's a case of killing 2 birds with 1 stone, subjecting the victim to a slow and agonizing death, while also facilitating the disposal of the body. In some cases, body parts are left in public areas to serve as a threatening message to those who challenge the responsible cartel. A well-known example is October 2010, when Israel Recon, a cartel member, was not only murdered, but dismembered for killing the son of one of El Chapo's allies. When El Chapo captured him, he tortured him until he lost consciousness, but had a doctor on standby to ensure he didn't die too quickly. El Chapo ordered his men to brutalize him in every horrific way possible, resulting in the dismemberment of his limbs, and his remains were subsequently dumped in the Mexican town of Carcom. Dismemberment is a brutal tactic that demonstrates the sheer cruelty embedded within these cartels. Cannibalism in the drug trade. Cannibalism within the drug trafficking world has been an open secret in recent years. The CJNG, led by El Mencho, has made headlines for this reason. Allegations of cannibalism have helped CJNG become one of the dominant cartels in the country, operating in at least 35 states across Mexico and Puerto Rico. Cartels need to ensure that their recruits can mentally handle these escalating levels of violence. They must suppress their empathy for those they kill or torture and forget that they are also human beings. Cannibalism has been used as a form of training to desensitize recruits to violence and cultivate fearlessness within them. These shocking public displays of aggression are used to threaten rival groups and demonstrate dominance, as part of an arsenal of techniques that include showcasing new weapons and military technologies possessed by the group. Recruits are taught to cut off fingers and toes, the cartel's favorite torture technique for interrogating rival gangs. During the training process, recruits are required to eat these severed limbs, and upon passing this test, they advance to larger body parts. If someone vomited during this ordeal, the instructors would retrieve the limbs from the agitated floor and force the individual to ingest them again. Additionally, these recruits were also required to sleep next to dead bodies at night, aimed at desensitizing them to death. Experts suggest that this brutal initiation ritual instilled a distorted sense of loyalty to the cartel, dismantling their own identities. Another well-known example is Miguel Trino Morales, known as Z40, the former leader of the Zetas. Miguel had the macabre habit of consuming the hearts of his victims. He did this as a spiritual ritual. Cartel kitchens. Mexican authorities indicate that at least 60,000 people have disappeared since 2006. However, a 2015 report found only 6 federal convictions for forced disappearance. The main cause of most of these disappearances is the cartel kitchens. These infamous Mexican cartel kitchens play a vital and disturbing role in their bloody campaign on the streets. If you enter, you will see blood-stained handprints on the walls, stained clothing, plastic seals, machetes, and, as one person observed, the sound of bones being broken under a thick blanket of ashes. This was the scene at the La Galeria farm in northern Veracruz, operated by the Los Zetas cartel. After the cartel took over the farm in 2011, it was used to incinerate their victims. The concept was very simple. They would identify a target over time, and instead of killing them and leaving the cold body in the street, they would abduct the target and take them to one of their 12 kitchen locations, where they would torture and extract valuable information before killing and disposing of the bodies. It is estimated that more than 60,000 people have been victims of cartel kitchens in Mexico. These disappearances have been carried out by various criminal groups with different motives, including abduction for sexual slavery, organ harvesting, forced labor, ransom, and even the repression of political activists and journalists. Mexican authorities report having sifted through mountains of human bones, fragments of teeth, nails, and more in the hope of identifying hundreds of victims who were tortured in these kitchens. Anyone who finds themselves in one of these kitchens undergoes immense psychological torture. Initially, you witness horrific scenes and hear the screams of other victims, which is enough to break even the strongest hearts. Before the torment actually begins, families are upset and frustrated that this kitchen on the farm was not a recent discovery. Since 2017, they have forced authorities to investigate the property more than 4 times, and each time, they found things that previous searches had missed. If one of your loved ones were involved in these kitchens, how would you feel about your government?